Hello, everyone, and welcome to Remote Production, the Cloud, and the Future of Television Workflows. We are once again very pleased to have veteran technology writer Glenn Dixon here to moderate today's webinar. Glenn, please begin as soon as you're ready.
Thanks, Kathy. Good afternoon, and welcome to Remote Production, the Cloud, and the Future of Television Workflows. I'm Glenn Dixon. The onset of the COVID-19 pandemic last year forced broadcasters to remove most personnel from their facilities and rapidly shift to new remote production techniques and cloud-based workflows. Over 16 months later, the COVID-19 situation in the US has stabilized, but many of those same workflows are still in place as broadcasters, like many other industries, have found new operational efficiency and flexibility in a distributed workforce. Today, our panel of experts will examine broadcasters' evolving use of remote production and the cloud and discuss their impact on the television facilities of the future. Joining me are Mike Kralik, VP of Technical Operations and Deputy CTO for Sinclair Broadcast Group, Kevin Brosnan, Solutions Architect for Teradici, Tim Murphy, Principal Program Manager for Media and Entertainment for Microsoft Azure, and Ray Thompson, Senior Director of Partner and Industry Marketing for Avid. For the audience, we'd like to make this experience as interactive as possible. There are some poll questions that'll be popping up on your screen that we'd like you to weigh in on. And please use the Q&A function to ask questions of our panelists, which we'll address towards the end. And if you're having any technical issues, please use the chat function to reach out to TV Newscast publisher Kathy Haley, who is helping manage the event. I want to start with Mike. What parts of Sinclair's operations have returned to their pre-COVID workflows, and what hasn't? And more important, why? You know, what hasn't changed?
I think the main piece. Well, let's start off with saying probably about 80% of our workflows have returned to sort of pre-COVID workflows. But some of the ones that haven't really, because I think what we're finding out is that this was a great instantiator of change for Sinclair, right? A lot of times you're concerned with disruption to workflows, resistance, some of this change management, and so a lot of the places where we haven't returned to the pre-COVID workflows are areas where we've either determined that it works really well with the new workflow, or we understand now that it's not really impacting our business. Maybe some of the concerns that would be there pre-COVID to workflow disruption, workforce disruption, those types of things didn't happen, or they happened at a level that was acceptable to us. So things like news field crew, it makes sense for them to be out in the field where the news is happening. They don't have to be in the office like they used to be. Some of the news production staff, the meetings for just planning and those types of operations, they're happening remotely now. People are more comfortable with the Zoom or the Teams or whatever your conferencing software is. They're a lot more comfortable with those types of meetings now. So a lot of times, like I said, it's about oh, good echo there. It's about the let's see if yep. I don't know, maybe it's me. 1 second. There we go. So no, it's been about it's gone now, but it's been about uncovering places where the post-COVID workflow is not is potentially even improved over what we had before.
And when you said about 80% of your workflows are back. What about staffing levels? What percentage of your staff, I guess, are back in the stations, and then maybe you can talk about some of your cable properties too.
I'd say it probably matches up pretty closely with the workflows themselves. It may be a little bit higher that staff are back in the office, but there's not this pressure. I'll say that there's not a pressure to for people to be in the office or be as present as it was in the past. I think the technology has taken some of that pressure off, and I think it's a great thing. I think it means that we can add some flexibility back to our workforce, and that's always nice to do.
And is that, when you say 80%, does it come with staffers maybe, taking 1 or 2 days a week where they work from home and then they're at the studio the other 3 days, or is it there's 20% of staffers who never come to the studio because, like, you mentioned journalists in the field, maybe people at bureaus, it was a hassle for them to get back to the mothership anyway, and now they realize they don't have to. But yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
How do you get to that 80%?
I don't know that I've been involved at that level of detail with how it's being implemented. But my impression is that we're leaving this open for being more dynamic, being less strict in general about what the potential requirements are, and focusing more on, and I think this is right for anybody, to focus more on getting the job done and less on the potential of how it gets done, whether or not it's remote or local. I think it's more important, and I think we've recognized this, that the work's getting done. Does it, is there necessarily a benefit, and what kind of analysis needs to be done on whether or not there's a benefit that outweighs the other benefit that we get in just having more flexibility with our workforce.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit about analyzing some of those costs, trying to look at it from a financial picture of, pros and cons. There's a lot of soft costs, and we talked about that, that people don't take into account, and soft cost savings too, with having distributed workflows. Kevin, can you briefly explain, for people who aren't familiar with Teradici, what you guys do, and how broadcasters use your technology during the pandemic?
Yeah, so Teradici invented the PCOIP remote display protocol. That's what's built into all of our remote desktop technology, including Teradici Cloud Access software, which actually won an Emmy Award last year for our work with broadcast and media and entertainment in general. What we've done is change how we work. We've enabled anybody to work from anywhere on any device and access the high-end workstations that they would normally be sitting in front of. And we're able to deliver that in a highly secure manner that actually meets all of the security regulations that most media and entertainment companies have to abide by.
Yeah, thanks. And obviously, I know several guys at stations and big news networks said your technology was a lifesaver, particularly in the early days of COVID, getting people access, getting editors access to on-premise hardware, getting graphics people able to do their job. But things have stabilized now, and as Mike noted, across his stations, a lot of people are back in the building. What workflows? I know you're enabling your desktop access from anywhere, but how have what workflows have people maybe started during the early days of COVID, and now they decided to stick with for the long term? If you can speak to like particular job functions, editing graphics, maybe other things.
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of adoption and continued adoption and use for editorial workflows. That was probably one of the first ones that got utilized almost immediately when everything was happening, and a lot of customers were just starting to dip their toes in the water with doing post-production and editorial workflows. We've also moved into being able to do some control room workflows as well that are solved by going over IP versus the traditional KVM style access, which has added a lot of flexibility for motion graphics, live editing, and some of the other control room operations that normally somebody would have to be sitting in that in that seat. Another big thing that happened was being able to utilize rooms that normally would have just been a editing room. And once you add the Teradici technology where you're able to sit down pretty much at any workstation, even when you're on premise, you can still say socially distanced. So control room operators can actually do control room operations from an editing bay, which is a lot of power and flexibility that wasn't there before.
Okay, thanks. Ray, we've spoken before about sort of the crisis days, the first couple of weeks of COVID, and just getting people up and running so they could keep producing television. Can you talk a little bit about how Avid's customers thinking on remote production, and then some of the cloud technology and the workflows enabled? How has that evolved since March 2020 to where we are here in July 2021?
Sure, and thank you for having me in the panel today. So I would say that the pandemic has really opened up the eyes, I would say, sort of across the industry as to the power of a distributed workforce, and the fact that technology certainly existed to enable that to happen in a very efficient way. I think that was somewhat of a surprise to a lot of people, and so therefore many companies have adjusted their longer term thinking around how to manage that, both from an operational perspective and an economic perspective. So some of the companies that we've been dealing with are actually looking at shrinking, sort of their footprint and really enabling that distributed workforce as a permanent sort of scenario. Other companies are bringing people back to work, but now they have a fully redundant setup at home. And so I think sort of what Mike said, right? It doesn't really matter where you are as long as you're getting the work done. And so because of the pandemic, a lot of our editors had to actually mirror what they would have had on-prem, right? Some people just grabbed everything and ran out the door. But then once they started enabling, Teradici, certainly we've done quite a bit of deployments with Teradici for sure, or RGS, right? Those were sort of the two main scenarios that we saw folks adopt when trying to adopt or access sort of on-prem environments. We also had a whole bucket of folks who turned to the cloud, right? So a number of folks who leveraged our Edit on Demand, which is sort of a turnkey SaaS offering that is editorial in the cloud, primarily for offline editing, right? And so we saw adoption of that for folks who are doing documentaries, news magazine type shows, certainly live entertainment, sorry, not live entertainment, but rather, more or less reality television, right? That's what I was trying to think of. And so, so we had a lot of different, sort of constituents gravitate towards deploying in the cloud. And the benefit being, of course, you're spinning up resources. You don't have to add any more gear. And you're really leveraging sort of the scalability and sort of the elasticity of the cloud, sort of spin up that environment, you use what you need to, and then you spin it back down. So we kind of found that folks sort of fit into those two buckets, really. And so I think there's been a pretty significant change in how people are starting to look at both scenarios and how they're going to move forward, right, from those different aspects.
And were some of these things in trials or being done as proofs of concept with some of your big customers, but you hadn't gotten the buy-in really, and then was it like flipping a switch, like a lot of people have described, where COVID happened and then all of a sudden people didn't have doubts about stuff that you might have been talking to them about for the last 2 or 3 years?
I think on the cloud side of things, yeah, probably, right? We did EOD came out officially at IBC back in 2019. And while we certainly had a lot of interest in it, it was definitely looked at as primarily a POC. Once the pandemic hit, people really started gravitating toward it. Our interest spiked significantly, and we had a lot of people actually use it out of necessity for real production. And so that happened quite a bit, especially at the beginning. And then since then, people have been using it and sort of realizing, again, a lot of the benefits. So it went quickly from, this is cool, this is a POC thing, we know we're going to have to do some kind of cloud something or another down the road, to we have to use this, we have to use it now, and wow, it works really great. Then there was the other end of the spectrum, which were folks who are using on-prem and accessing on-prem resources, and certainly virtualized environments were something that the industry had been building and gravitating toward quite some time. And really Cloud VM for Media Composer already existed. So that had been around for several years, but it really wasn't until the pandemic, I think, that people really in a large way, took advantage of it. And that combined with Teradici really enabled a significant pivot to happen very quickly. So yeah, it was I'd say more on the cloud side, went from POC to use it every day. And then on the on-prem side, it was leveraging primarily existing technologies with the introduction of the Teradici piece, or leveraging RGS, which of course was already too.
Okay, thanks. Tim, how did COVID-19 change how broadcasters use Microsoft's cloud services? And what workflows right now do you see expanding in the future?
Yeah, and like Ray said, thanks for having me here today, Glenn. This is a great panel. I would echo everything I just heard from Ray, Mike, and Kevin. I remember being in LA. I was with a couple major studios, and I want to say it was early March. And I landed back here in Raleigh, where I live, and I got off, and I had a voicemail, Ray, from your boss, and he said, "I just got out of a board meeting. Are you getting the same calls?" I knew exactly what he meant. Right? It was like, how do we get, like, there is going to be a change. How do we enable work from home as quickly as possible? So, we went through this maturity cycle too of, we had this kind of natural reaction. Let's get everyone on the cloud as quickly as possible and solve the problems. The reality was, local news, I was a former local broadcaster myself. In this case, it was literally life-saving service. So we knew we had to help get our customers and partners. And if that meant, introducing them folks like Teradici and Avid and say, hey, listen, you can punch through a firewall if you're within, a certain proximity of your facility, it'll work, get the news back on it, it's important stuff. When we went through like hybrid deployments, like Ray said, folks literally picked up their laptops and went home with them, like, now how do I get terabytes of my content over there? We got partners, there are ways to enable that. So we just kind of started like evolving on best practices, sharing it in the community, and then I remember at one point, and Ray, you'll remember this, with a major international broadcaster, we went from one country in a region of, I don't know, 20, 30 edit seats to literally thousands around the world, sharing files, collaborating together. We all kind of like looked at each other, well, yeah, it works. I mean, we've known for years this would work. It was unfortunate. This event is what pivoted the industry, but man, we saw the maturity cycle go from, okay, let's get it out there. Let's punch through firewalls. Let's call things real. I got folks moving around because they're not comfortable in their hometown. They're going to another location. How do I enable them remotely now? Let's get them on cloud. Oh, I need to start moving, my assets in the cloud so I can collaborate better. How do we integrate teams? Just like the whole spectrum to like, man, I have got to make this easier for my operators, right? And that's the phase that I'm seeing now. Glenn, we've kind of come to the end of this. The industry and the technology is getting mature enough to the point where we go, yeah, let's move from a Snowflake deployment, and how do we make this repeatable? How do I enable that editor at home to just get what he needs, when he needs or she needs it, and go, right? And then tear it down when I'm done. And so there's a number of programs in place that my teams are running. It's just like, I go to a portal, I say, I'm this editor in this place, I need this much storage, this is where my content needs to go, right? And come back in a few minutes. And they've got, a work group stood up, and it's really been impactful. And I would echo everything Mike's saying. We're seeing the same kind of patterns of, folks wanting to stay home, folks wanting to go in. But the great thing is technology is enabling both use cases.
Okay, thanks. As Ray and Tim described, the initial shift to remote production was driven by necessity. In order to get people out of the building, meet social distancing requirements. Even as people started to come back in, you still had to have 6 feet between personnel. So people were limited. We saw that with the sports industry through the last year, how they managed that. Going forward, when you look at the continuation of some of these workflows, how much of it is, now you don't have to do it, but people are still doing it? How much of it is based on, flexibility for operators, work-life balance, and how much of it is just a question of real estate costs? That people, Ray referenced, some people are looking at reducing their footprint. I guess I'll throw it to Mike first, because Sinclair's got a lot of real estate. But yeah, when you look at the cloud in general, how much of it is based on that versus other things? And then
I'll say it's going to be mostly workflow driven and not necessarily real estate driven. There's obviously, I think I think anybody that's not being opportunistic with with their real estate and what their footprint is and whether or not it's still the right footprint. I mean, I guess it's sort of just a traditional business function of taking a look at that. And I do think that we're going to see some changes. I don't know that they're rapid changes here. This isn't, the crisis, the pandemic pivoted us very quickly to a lot of these workflows. Real estate's going to be it's going to be a lagging, lagging to the rest of these workflows that have changed. And I do think that it's still going to be, primarily most of these workflows are going to stay there, the way they are, because we're taking advantage of the fact that technology is moving forward here still, right? All of us intended, and I think I speak for most people in the industry here, to move towards more dynamic operating models, things where we're more flexible, where we consume things as a service, that we, as Tim said, that we spin things up and we spin things down as we need things very quickly. We adapt the operational workflows to the needs of the business. And so I think that's the main reason why most sort of workflows are staying the way they are, or even evolving more. The real estate function, I think it's downstream, a downstream effect. I do think that there will be an effect, but definitely lagging to the rest of this.
Okay, yeah, I want to ask you a follow up on that. Sinclair has built a couple big new facilities in the last couple of years, a new IP plant for Tennis Channel, and then just in the last couple of months, you built a new playout center for the sports networks down in Atlanta. But when you look overall across, your stations and properties, I guess the industry in general, how much of a need do you see going forward to build new broadcast facilities with on-premise equipment, given all that you can do in the cloud these days and all that people can do from home? Does this move to cloud, which you guys have been leaders in, does that remove the need to invest in new on-prem gear?
No, I don't think it necessarily removes the need. Those particular pieces, the Tennis Channel and our regional sports networks, you got to take those as their own thing. They're mostly on-prem. There's places where we try to move the needle on the workflows as best we could, but given constraints for various reasons, they are how they are. Does that mean it's our long-term strategy? I think we're going to see. I think we will probably make sure that we take the technology into account more, that we try to handle more transformational efforts in what we do moving forward. These particular pieces, didn't allow that, or at least not to the level that I think we're hoping in the future. But it does seem likely for us to consider, less of that those traditional facility build outs in the future, and more of them to be aligned with cloud production, with cloud automation, cloud playout. I mean, there's nothing that we're necessarily fundamentally opposed to with moving to cloud, and the real estate will reflect that.
Okay, thanks. Kevin, what are you seeing from your customers in regards to how they're using their office space, and do you see folks looking at downsizing their real estate, or maybe pulling back on plans to build new facilities now that all this remote stuff has proven itself out?
Yeah, Glenn, I think Mike touched on something where it's going to be opportunistic when it comes to letting go of real estate. Maybe leases were up and the timing was perfect, and they've already moved all of their production environment to the cloud. So we definitely have customers that have lit their headquarters or their expensive real estate in places like Manhattan Go, and they plan on 100% continuing to work from home and work in the cloud. So they've gotten rid of their data center and they've gotten rid of their office. We have other customers who have very heavy investments in their data centers or are looking to make rebuild their data center or refresh data centers. I think what we're seeing is more of a shift to virtualization and IP, and that's been a game changing for just infrastructure cost optimization, flexibility, and now you're able to seamlessly extend that footprint into the cloud, for economical storage, server resources, and with Teradici, we're able to deliver and realize a full-blown workstation streamed over IP from the cloud or from on-premise, from anywhere. So that's been very powerful. I think it's changed how people are looking at their data center or their real estate and how they use it, because there's a lot more flexibility now. Another thing that we see is universal workstations or workspaces, so that even with social distancing still in play in some buildings, you can sit pretty much anywhere that's free, log into your workstation that may be in a data center on premise or maybe in Azure cloud. Wherever it is, you'll get the same experience as if you're actually sitting down and have that computer right under your desk.
Okay, thanks. Ray, you had mentioned the office footprint issue. What are you seeing some of your big customers? What are they looking at? And you have some big customers who maybe had new facilities planned that have pulled back on that because of the changes. And let's be honest, still some ongoing uncertainty about where the whole industry is at in regards to the pandemic. It hasn't totally gone away, but yeah, what are you seeing in terms of people's facilities and how they're thinking?
Yeah, I think they're just thinking, reevaluating that strategy as a whole, right? And I can't think of anybody specifically who maybe was building something new that's going to pull off of that, but rather, I think, as maybe Kevin or Mike mentioned, folks who might be coming up on a lease, the end of a lease, sort of re-examining whether or not to renew that lease, whereas maybe in the past that would have been a no-brainer, right, to go ahead and renew that, enabling that distributed workforce because it's been working so well. I'd say that's probably more along the lines of what we've seen, and then just people thinking longer term, right? If they're in a lease, maybe they're going to sublease something, or maybe they're going to keep what they have, but then, like I said, sort of build out more technologies to further enable a more distributed workforce to do even more at home. And so definitely seen that for sure, as it relates specifically to real estate. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And Tim, anything you're seeing on the real estate side with your customers that's driving some more use of cloud?
Yeah, I can speak from just experiences. So like Ray said, I'm not familiar with someone looking to, bail on an existing build on-prem. What I would say though, are, the conversations I'm having at a business level are more about how do I get more production, better value, just more volume of work out of my existing footprint, whether it's personnel or on-prem. And a lot of those conversations naturally navigate to, are the workloads that make sense to do in the cloud that complement what you're doing on-prem to enable remote workers. So those are relatively easy ones to target. Another thing I would say is, like, we're still building data centers. Every morning I get up, it's like another region's been announced or another. It's unbelievable the rate of which Microsoft and all the cloud providers are deploying data centers around the world. And kind of the third point is, and this was announced publicly yesterday, that the Teams product group announced, I believe, 250 million plus active Teams users per month right now. And I don't know what the number was before the pandemic, but it wasn't that. It was nowhere near that. There's some indicators that this remote, collaboration, remote work is here to stay.
Okay, thanks. We've obviously we've been talking a lot about technology and everything you can do, but there's a big people side to all these changes too. And, you know, Mike alluded to it a little bit in his opening answer, but, you know, can you talk a little more about the people side of bringing on this technology and, you know, in terms of change management, training, and maybe even hiring new personnel? Mike, you're muted.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
Yeah.
There.
It's always fun.
I'm sorry. I was actually responding to one of the Q&As, so I missed the question there.
Okay, I'll throw it to you again.
Okay,
Yeah, I saw that you were responding to that, and I am gonna
No problem.
ask the panel that question anyway. But yeah, my question was, and it relates to what you're talking about, the personnel issue, the human side of this.
Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning, you know, the change management, getting people to buy into it. You know, on our prep call, we kind of made the comment that technology works. That's not the hard part of this.
Mhm.
It's changing people's roles and training. And so, yeah, can talk about that, and maybe have you had to hire new personnel too, now that, you know, software development is such a big focus.
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely critical that we focus on the people, right? I stand by what I said on the prep call, that the technology along this is the easy part, and change management and org disruption is the difficult piece. Workforce management, understanding, you know, I think we're in it's just sort of a golden age of remote work at this point, right? We're all learning and identifying what you know, what workflows, and we're actually the biggest challenge here is software development, right? How quickly can we go through our sprints? How agile can we be in software development? How quickly can we deliver on the new features that are required to implement the workflows we want to do? I think it's absolutely, you know, it's sort of key to this whole thing is, how do we engage with our employees? How do we focus on their workflows? How do we understand their processes better? Because without focusing on the processes, without focusing on the workflows, we're really, we're not going to be able to get to this service-oriented, you know, environment, the technology environment that I think we've all been, you know, talking about, where things are very, everything, all the processes are very workflow based, right? So that, you know, I'm going back to what Tim said again, spinning things up when we need them, spinning them down when we don't need them, understanding how many editors we need at any point in time, understanding how many production control rooms we need at any point in time. All of this involves deep interrogation into our workflows, understanding how our employees need to work, how they want to work, and then developing the software with our partners, our vendor partners, to map to those workflows.
Okay, thanks. You know, Ray, what are you seeing on the training side of this, I guess, and the overall personnel side of your customers? I mean, are they, yeah, it's just a sort of looming question. A lot of these webinars I've done about the cloud is, you know, basically, can your traditional broadcast technology and operations staff, can those people be brought up to speed with working with the cloud and running TV operations that way? Or do you need to bring in new people? You know, that seems to be the same fundamental question that comes up a lot. But what are you seeing from your customers?
Sure. So really there's two buckets, right? There's the SaaS offerings, right? Which is quite honestly has been a cultural change even at Avid, right? The way in which we think about how we deliver those services, right? At the end of the day, we are, you know, looking at everything, including the back office, which in the past, right? If you deliver a product, like Media Composer, you don't have to really worry about, you know, how a person actually, you know, buys that product online, right? In terms of being able to do it in the cloud. And so being able to offer them a turnkey SaaS offering that incorporates all of these different components that, again, in the past, were not necessarily part of product offering is a big change for Avid. And Edit On Demand is certainly one of those, the first, quite honestly, SaaS offering from Avid. So that was a new thing, right, in terms of how to develop that as a tool. And we were really looking at it from a customer experience perspective, because that customer experience is different, right? Because of the way in which you want to maybe add more editors, or maybe you want to add more storage, maybe you need to increase bandwidth, right? As a project increases over time and you need more storage, you need more users, you need more editors, you need to be able to do so in a very simple and interactive fashion. And so that's a change, right? It's a big change for us. And then at the end of the day, it's working with the customer to understand what that experience needs to be and what we need to deliver in order to enable the workflows that I think Mike was referring to. Then you have more of the sort of on-prem sort of deployed solutions, which training those folks is absolutely doable. I think a big component of anything that we've engaged with has, of course, the technology engagement through professional services. We talk about, hey, what are your long-term goals economically, operationally, and so on. But then there's the training aspect of that, right? And being able to enable those teams to not only help build those environments, but then obviously long-term help maintain those environments. Well, that's certainly much easier doing so in the cloud, right? In many ways, right? Versus an on-prem sort of, rack and stack type of model. There's definitely some training that needs to go on. So that's always been a big component for any of the opportunities that we've engaged with when there's more custom deployed happening on site and or moving stuff into the cloud and doing so across multiple geographies. So yeah, we think that that's certainly a big challenge, and culturally that's a big deal. And then the last thing is for talent themselves, right? When you start moving into the cloud, you now have this bigger pool of talent, right? Not only can company now choose from a broader sort of set of talent that maybe is not necessarily close in proximity to the facility itself, but now can be thousands of miles away and still have a good experience. Same thing for those workers, right? Those editors can now move away from potentially areas where traditional production used to happen in the past, and go out into a rural area and still be making a good living while being editing in the cloud, right? Being able to edit in the cloud. So there's a lot of things I think that are sort of moving in parallel here that are changing. And it isn't just for the customers, it's for the vendors building the technologies themselves too. It's a different mindset.
Okay, thanks, Ray. And I would just like a note for the audience. If you could please, we are going to have time for Q&A, and I see a couple good questions coming in, but I keep seeing questions coming up in chat, and it's hard for me to keep track of everything. So if you want your question to get answered, please put it in the Q&A function. It's all part of the training we're talking about here, to train people on our webinar rules. But anyway, Tim, can you talk a little bit about how your customers are dealing with personnel issues, and do you see are there new hires happening across traditional broadcasters to do some of the software development that Mike was talking about?
Yeah, no, it's a hot topic for sure. I'm glad we're talking about this openly, transparently. Mike and Ray and even Kevin will tell you, one of the first questions that my team will ask is, do you have a development team? Second question, how large are they? So if you find out it's a person in the closet, it's not going to get it done. So there are few and far between projects where we don't actually embed one of our enterprise software development teams in a code with manner with our customers and partners. That's how critical this is. If you go through the loop of trying to do it yourself, and to Mike's earlier point, you foul up the user experience and you don't get the adoption rate early, you're not going to win the hearts and minds of the creative community, at least. And then it's going to be an uphill battle from there. So that's an important aspect, and a lot of our conversation, start with the problem, user experience, and work your way back. And as you work your way back and you mature in your kind of development cycles and your deployment patterns, then you start to realize there's new opportunity to track new things, like how I cost a facility or a use case internally. How do I build that back? How do I motivate my operators to use it only for the time that they need it, spin up, then tear it down. Mike's mentioned that more than once. I mean, the ugly truth of the cloud is if you leave it running, you're spinning a dial, you're running up a bill. But there's a lot of automation out there. There's a lot of tools and analytics. You can start to make, really informed decisions about, how your infrastructure is being used, what does it look like as an asset moves through my supply chain? What is the costing of that? what operators are rock stars, who needs some further training. There's just a world of opportunity out there with data that's just untapped in this industry. And I'm starting to have more of those conversations about, how do we embed this kind of digital feedback loop? How do I, as it's going through distribution, how do I understand how it went through my supply chain to that point? And how do I improve that process? How do I make it more cost efficient, time efficient? Can I improve something through my DevOps cycle because I've noticed the user is clicking 3 times when it should have been 1 time? So it's just a Mike's nodding down. He's been through this. It's just a world of opportunity out there, and we're starting to have those conversations, which frankly, I'm really excited about, because I think this is going to be the next evolution.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it occurs to me, I've written stories about the cloud where people, they talk about vendors and they talk about how traditional vendors approach using the cloud, and then there's cloud native vendors, and and the point being, if you sometimes those newer companies take more advantage of some of the cost savings or use it more efficiently. I guess you could say the same thing about the people working with it, right? You have to have a knowledge base of what works well in the cloud, and really be able to use the analytics, or to your point, you can be wasting some money. Kevin, your software, I guess at a 10,000 foot level, you'd say, well, there's not a lot of training that has to happen with Teradici. If you're just taking a desktop you're already used to in your office and you're bringing it home, maybe that's not new from a user standpoint. But I know you also work with cloud platforms as well as on-prem hardware. Can you talk about the personnel issue amongst your customers, and is there training going on actively with setting people up to work from home on a permanent or a meaningful basis?
Yeah, so I can touch on some of those things. From a Teradici perspective, we're very much the user-facing piece. So there's a lot of these decisions and discussions and workflows that have to be identified to be a good candidate, and then it comes down to, well, how do we put that in front of the user? So some of the decisions that need to be made from that standpoint would be, are we going to allow them to use any device that they have at home, and then support that, which can sometimes put a strain on a support environment. So even though we support Mac, Windows, Linux clients, various different platforms, it sometimes makes sense, at large scale, for your supportability to develop kits. So we have customers that have actually, once we've either virtualized everything or set up the hybrid environment and we're enabling the access, it's controlling what's at the user's home now. Now we can send them a kit. Here's your 2 displays. Here's your endpoint that's going to access your high-powered desktop, no matter where that is. And now the supportability is a lot easier. And it also lessens the training, because now it's step-by-step. There's no nuances there. So I think that's been something that I've been involved in with a lot of customers, is easing that, because it does come down to, we can make all these great changes and everything, but a big question is, how do we support that? So definitely simplifying that has been advantageous for large environments.
Okay, thanks. It's get about 3/4 of the way through, and I do want to take some audience questions, so I don't get gas on and spend all our time. First question that came in, we talked around this, but this is a little more particular. I'll run this by Mike first. Are any production control room functions that were remoted, or any that stayed decentralized? So I know we talked about editing and graphics being remoted, but I think this is talking about actually running the newscast.
No, I think I think we're mostly status quo there. We're not that we're not interested in it, but there's a lot of other concern. I mean, just the amount of components in a production control room, workflows. These are prohibitive to picking these off piece by piece. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to pick off which components, eat the whale one bite at a time, kind of thing. And so currently, no. The rest of it depends upon some of the things I've said earlier, how quickly we can work with vendor partners on development roadmaps, understand what critical components work for our existing processes, where our processes should change. I mean, I think there's a question out there around latency too, and obviously huge question of how everything gets timed, right? But the only way to really get through these is to find the right place to put some pressure immediately, and then iterate from there. And that's what our focus has been, is on iteration, on changing our workflows to take advantage of the new technology as it comes.
Right. And that is it. What you're describing is very much like a software development mindset, right? And so how hard is it to get traditional broadcast folks to think that way? I mean, it was another comment you made in the prep calls. It's not a bad thing to fail. You try a workflow and you try it for a month and then it doesn't work, and then you move on. Are the people at the local stations comfortable with working that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a human element to this, right? You have to listen, you have to understand, you have to commit to, building a level of trust that has to exist between technologists and the people that are using the technology, and that's been a key component for us, is making sure the right people are in the room. We're always asking for the right stakeholders to be engaged on this, and that is absolutely key to building that trust, making our employees part of the overall effort to change processes. They may not necessarily see everything our way, and we may not see everything their way. But that trust a lot of times lets us get past the starting line and figure out where we might be helpful to each other. And in many times we're able to improve through that collaboration.
Okay, thanks. Another question, Sean Maynard said, since live production depends on real-time interactivity, what have been some of the challenges working in the cloud regarding time management when staffing is in various geographic locations, and I imagine different time zones? Time is a challenge, and how have you solved it? And I guess, well, I'll throw that one to Tim. Tim, maybe you can talk about some of his customers, and I'll go back to Mike and Ray. But yeah, it's this notion of having a distributed workforce also means people are getting up at different times, and how have your customers managed that?
Yeah, I don't know, like everyone else, I think I'm working 24 hours a day to solve that problem since COVID started. I like to think it's settled down, but it hasn't. I don't know if I have a good answer. I mean, there's timing within the production, there's laws of physics and latency characteristics like Mike mentioned. And, as an industry, we'll come up with tricks. I can tell you, we've piloted standing up, modest production control rooms and then put them on air. I wouldn't put the nightly news on it, but it's good enough for a 4 or 6 camera shoot, a lot of corporate comms events, esports. I'm looking at a lot of adjacent markets, so we can go learn over there and then bring, the learnings and the strategy into the broadcast community. And I'm actually very encouraged. Gone through a first phase, things are well. I mentioned some are on air. We're looking at a second phase to how do we make this more of a pluggable architecture. So Mike could say, I want this vendor for this show and this other vendor for another show, and go, right. And those conversations are around, based on production volume. I need to do more local events, more like high school sports, college sports, whatever it may be. It's kind of those level of conversations. It's not Sunday night football or anything like that at this point. As far as geographically diverse, I think the offline functions and workflows are the easiest to tackle first. We've done a number of projects with Avid actually, and with Adobe, where they're in the studio workflow. They're shooting in London, and they have their editors at home in Los Angeles, and that actually geographically diverse time frame actually works really well, because you can shooting, shut down, migrate your assets over a massive backbone. Every public cloud provider has a massive network, and it's relatively easy to move very large files around the world, so that when the editor comes into their home office the next morning, they've got all the assets they need to do their job and push it back into a central archive. So it's a long-winded way of saying, I think, the offline workflows have been the easiest to tackle so far.
Okay, thanks. Ray, Tim's talking about what's easy to do in the cloud today. What are you seeing that's still hard? What are workflows that your customers, not just in television, but maybe more broadly in entertainment, just don't feel comfortable bringing to the cloud, or just don't work because of either bandwidth or latency issues?
I think for, like Tim said, most of what we've done has been offline and mostly offline editing. So things that are more difficult would be online editing. That for post, for example, that would include things like color correction, higher resolution, higher bitrate content into the cloud. Of course, that's a challenge. You have to transcode it down to a lower bitrate, then push it up. We haven't done a ton of live, if any at all, at this point, mainly because for Avid anyway, we didn't have a way to get live content into the cloud. We do now. We introduced a product at the beginning of the year called Media Central Stream that accepts incoming IP feeds into an on-prem or cloud environment. But we're still on the front end, quite honestly, of implementing full end-to-end live productions in the cloud. So I'd say we're still on the front end of that wave from an Avid perspective. And then, you think about news, right? And Mike already described it, right? There's a lot that happens in a news organization to deliver a newscast, including graphics, automation, certainly orchestration. So there's a lot of those pieces and parts that I think are still not as turnkey as you'd like them to be for a cloud deployed solution. So those are all things we're working on, but yeah, those are things that still need some time to develop, and that's what we're working on. Because think about it, the pandemic was happening, right? And it was unexpected for everybody. And so we were, Avid, quite honestly, was on its own development journey in terms of developing our tool sets to be able to run into the cloud and run in the cloud rather. And so that is still a journey, right? For us, as much as it is for our customers who are trying to also migrate different workflows. But I think the important thing is getting that confidence. I think that's one of the things that Edit On Demand is providing is some level of confidence that says, I can deploy editorial in the cloud. I can do offline editing. It's really effective. I can take down then the resulting projects and bins and point it back to my high-res media in my on-prem environment. And I can do any finishing work if needed to finish that project. So that's a lot of what we've seen, quite honestly, so far.
Okay, thanks. Another question from the audience, and I'm going to throw this one to Mike. Yeah, you touched on it a little bit, but the question is basically, what are the main obstacles to moving broadcast live production to the cloud? Not talking about corner cases or sort of one-off things, but main production workflows. And person suggests that latency could be one, and production switchers could be another bottleneck. But what do you see, Mike?
Yeah, I saw this question out there, and yeah, it's I think in general, it's the complexity of the workflows that exist on-prem and the embedded, those embedded workflows, some resistance to change. I mean, there's technical problems for sure, but fundamentally, I don't think that we don't have the tools to fix the technical issues. I believe we do have the tools to fix these issues. And if you see my slant on the approach here, you'll know that I was a software developer in a previous life, right? So I do think it's an iterative process to taking the concerns over latency, to taking the concerns over just exactly how all the components come together. How do we align the iterative nature on how we'd like to transform these workflows with the product roadmaps that our vendor partners have, and that's why it's become a much closer relationship on what's happening. Why do all these customer advisory panels exist, and why do all these why are we getting so engaged? Well, because it's absolutely critical for us to be aligned on the technology so that we know how we can iteratively change these workflows. And that's really the story for us, is that we are becoming a very software-driven industry, and we need to be prepared for that.
Thanks. We talked a little bit about latency, and we've been talking about the cloud. I want to ask Kevin, how much of an issue is latency for what you do? For someone doing high-end editing at home or graphics, using remote desktop, is latency an issue? I think maybe.
Yeah, sorry.
There you go. Good.
I had to unmute.
So
bandwidth and latency are definitely two things that come up a lot, right? There's, like Tim mentioned, the laws of physics that aren't going to be solved immediately. But when you start to enable workflows in the cloud for the use cases that fit there, the amount of data centers and how geographically dispersed they are, pretty much anybody working from home is able to access. With us, they'd be accessing a full desktop experience, and their latency is going to be minimal. We also have a lot of features to dynamically adapt to network conditions so that the perception of that latency is dampened significantly, so that you're not going to notice that there's any kind of delay when you're interacting with the desktop, even if you might be 70 milliseconds away from your remote desktop in the cloud. Bandwidth is another consideration, but we've developed features, like our PCIe Ultra Auto Upload, which will flip back and forth between different ways of encoding the pixels that are being transmitted. And that alone can actually allow for 80% bandwidth reduction from our standard modes, and also 50% CPU savings. So there's a lot of work that we've already done under the hood that kind of automatically absorbs any latency that's there, and also has made bandwidth efficiency, a big part of our solution.
Okay, thanks. Another audience question, and maybe I'll throw this to Kevin first and let everyone else tackle it, but pretty basic one. How is tech support handled with all these remote users? The lack of uniformity in user equipment must make it difficult to deal with. So I guess I'll throw that one to Kevin first, and then let Mike take a stab at it.
Yeah, so I think I touched on that a little bit earlier, right? Is you have to identify what you're going to be able to support if you have a support team that can support multiple platforms. So basically everybody working from home using whatever it is that they have at home, and being able to support that. One way that we make that easy is that no matter what you're running on, you're just launching a client, logging in, and then from that point, after login, you have a full desktop experience as if that high-end workstation was under your desk. So there's not a lot to support there, more so just ensuring that users have enough bandwidth, to do their job and do the work that they need to do. And also that, they're not, let's say, wireless. Wireless is a killer. So anybody that's trying to, remote a desktop over wireless is just adding a headache to themselves. So things like just identifying, making sure users are hardwired, identifying that they meet system specs to deliver the resolution and the frame rates that are needed. And that's really what's going to come down to the supportability. And then on the other side of things, right, whether you're in the cloud or on premise in a data center, it allows you to centralize all of these resources, right? So it can make virtualization happen where there was still production silos, old legacy production environments that are, independent of the main corporate network. Being able to centralize and virtualize those makes management, upgrades, management, and adds that flexibility, and it makes it a lot easier to support.
Yeah, I'll just follow on real quick. Just it's abstracting the user from the operating environment, right? So that might happen via remote desktop. That may happen via common HTML5 interfaces. It may happen, and I think that combined with what Kevin said around ensuring the environment that they're physically in is as controlled as possible, limits your tech support issues. But it's definitely a concern.
Okay, thanks. Here's another question from the audience. This might be our last one, but I'll throw this one to Tim. question is, what does a cloud services invoice look like? Is there a price for spin up, one for spin down, one for groups of users, one for duration of use?
Yeah, I would say call sales. I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that. Ray, you might be more qualified to answer that question. We do get our bills, but it is certainly consumption based, right? So that we talked many times about spin up and tear it down when you're done. I mean, that is how you're going to control your cost. And I just wanted to make a comment on the earlier question to Kevin and Mike around you're starting to see a maturity in the industry actually start to build some of that intelligence into deployment automation, doing a speed test before you deploy, raising the result to the UX layer so the operator can make the decision, hey, am I willing to deal with an occasional hiccup, or do I want to spend 2 hours commuting back into the city, right? And you'll find often they'll deal with the hiccup.
Yeah, no, I mean, all office workers are sort of dealing with that same fundamental question across a bunch of industries. One last question that is actually an audience question we tackled about time and different time zones, and I guess I misconstrued the question, but person want to clarify. Was regarding latency between sources and the visual feedback for operations working from various geographic locations. As we're basically talking about a live production through the cloud with people working remotely and maybe people, even accessing different zones or whatever on a platform. Is that latency still an issue for someone trying to do live through the cloud?
It is. I mean, how
100%.
consistent is your latency? Can you dial it back out? I mean, that's the big question. And I don't know that dynamic latency timing has been really figured out at this point, but we'll figure it out eventually. I mean, there's ways to do it, but we haven't solved that problem yet, as far as I can tell.
Okay. Well, hey, fair enough. Our time has come to an end. I feel like it could have gone on for another hour easily, but I really appreciate all the audience questions. Obviously, we had a lot of engaged people, got a lot of good questions from the audience, and I saw a lot of communication on chat too. And our panelists were actually doing a very good job trying to answer some questions in the background. So, in addition to answering all mine, so I really appreciate everyone's time. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and wish everyone a good afternoon. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Glenn.
Take care.
Take care.